Okay, so I wanted to kind of talk about one of the complications of writing these days. One of the things you face as a writer, especially if you're kind of thinking about a screenplay, is there's so many movies, there's so many shows. There's so, for instance, have you ever thought about writing a new chase scene for a movie? I mean, think of all the chase scenes that have been done, right? Since French Connection. I mean, every time you see a new movie, there's some new twist on a chase scene. I mean, it's starting to get ridiculous, right? I mean, because you know why? Because there's only so many ways to construct a chase scene in a movie. I mean, maybe it's infinite. Maybe the next chase scene is 20 tanks in the streets of Paris chasing a motorcycle during a snowstorm and an alien invasion or something, right? I mean, the point is that what can you do that's new, right? But that's the challenge of writing, is to try to figure out what's new, what you can add that hasn't been done before. Well, one of the things I've noticed as I've binge watched many different shows is the characters modernly are becoming more vulnerable. It wouldn't be uncommon to see a heroic character in your movie who's a drug addict or a recovering drug addict, or has there's just, you think of Bruce Willis sitting in a train station drunk, and they find him and they resurrect him so that he could go save the day in some sequel to a movie he's done before. I mean, the point being is that and even modernly, right now, contemporary shows are introducing weaknesses into characters that are really profound, and it makes them vulnerable. And then you show the human side so that they, you start to say, well, they have this really big problem, but they're trying and they're going to change and that kind of thing. And so it's like a chase scene. As you write, what can you do to make a character vulnerable with a problem that hasn't been, kind of put into a character yet? You can only have so many, recovering drug addicts or whatever in a show about a heroic character. There's only so many things in life that make you vulnerable or that show that you're human, or that. So I've just finished writing the part 2 of the cluster. It's called The Fortress. Part 2 is called The Fortress. And anyone who's read part 1 knows where I'm going as far as introducing a particular vulnerability and weakness in one of my characters. And generally speaking, this weakness is a theme, and it's an intentional thing to kind of illustrate that, okay, you've got this imperfection, but then you have a real person. And the background for my particular character, who's a female in my book series, is I had a girlfriend once, and I loved her. She was just a very loving, sweet human being, very, very kind person, and I was in love with her. We were going to get married. It didn't work out, but I mean, it was a really good relationship, and we loved each other, and it was, the way it ended is another story, but, well, and having to do a little bit with the problem. But early in our relationship, we moved in together, and one night she was gone, and I found this book, and I tell you, I thumbed through the book, and it was her book, and I thumbed through it, and I just couldn't believe the stories that were in this book. Little short stories, 5-10 pages long. And they were very graphic. And I didn't even know that they were legal to have that kind of material published. And it turned out that this sweet girl that I was dating and that I was going to marry had been, well, things happened to her when she was a kid that are illegal. right? And I'm not going to go into the details, but she had a very troubled childhood, and that's not unusual. It does happen to people. It happens to females. You know, they grow up in a certain environment, and they have things happen to them, and it scars them, or it damages them, or it hurts them, or it's baggage they carry into their adult life. And it wasn't their fault. They may have been 6, 7, 8, 10 years old or something, and something happens, and it may be a repetitive situation. And you know, there are people out there that have that baggage. And what are we supposed to do with them? Not love them? You know, not marry them? Not be, you know, a good, loving, kind partner with them? And so I found this book, and I just couldn't believe it. You know, it was shocking to me. So I talked to her about it, and she told me that the book was prescribed by her psychologist. It was actually a prescription. She had this book in her possession so that, according to the prescription, according to the psychologist, so that she could retake some of that territory back, so that she could master, as it were, the memories and the events and repossess them for herself. And so this book was a book of erotic stuff that she was supposed to use. And I found out years later that this is a thing that happens in therapy. Some people are given that prescription. So one of my characters has this particular background. Same thing, a vulnerability, a particular adult kind of take on a vulnerability, and a book that they have been prescribed to resolve or address or bring closure to or healing to something that happened in their past that wasn't their fault. And how that tension, in a case of my storyline, a new boyfriend who loves this gal in the book, how that tension affects their relationship. And then that particular kind of genre of reality that does exist in our world brings up a whole kind of can of worms as far as that whole subject matter. So part 2, The Fortress, and by the way, The Cluster, okay? Where did the title The Cluster come from? Which is the title of my book series. Well, let me just say, to be polite, it was going to be another derivation of the word cluster when I started. But I just thought, well, what am I going to do? I can't publish it if it's cluster blank, because I think that cluster blank is a kind of a good description of a lot of the stuff in this world. It's just a cluster blank, right? So I couldn't title it that, so The Cluster became the title of the book. And then there's other kind of things that come into that title that I've put into the story. But the second part is graphic. It is action-packed. It involves a chase scene, but it's not a chase scene involving 10 tanks in Paris during a snowstorm and an alien invasion. Although I will say, with that particular ID, copyright February 8th, 2020, all rights reserved, because you never know. Maybe that's a good idea, right? Point being, the book is out. Understand the general theme of this series does have some of this more graphic material, but it's part of the storyline, and the intent is to contrast the human weakness with recovery and the fact that people are still worthy of being loved, they're worthy of being treated with respect, even though they might have a ton of baggage, right? I mean, what are you going to do? Tell every single person on the planet that they should never ever hook up with somebody that's got a past or some baggage? Well, that would leave millions of people, by definition, alone in this world. That's not what God would want. That's not what love is. That's not what forgiveness is. That's not what we're here for. If there's, you know, everybody has something, right? So my stories are going to bring up certain things in order to address the past, the present, and the future of a particular human being's life. So I hope that gives some kind of, you know, color to the storyline. This video, though, was intended to announce that Part 2 of the cluster, called The Fortress, is now available on Amazon.com.